Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to this book launch. Thank you for joining us. I'm so very excited that we are launching Joe Carrick-Varty's debut collection, More Sky. My name is Jasmine. I'm from Carcanet Press, and I'm just going to run over what we're going to do this evening before we hand over. So we're going to be together for about an hour. Please do find the chat box, say hello to us, just get your messages in there, let us know where you're watching from and let us know what you think of the reading throughout the event. Make sure that your setting is set to everyone, please, so that we can all see each other's messages, otherwise they might get lost. Now, we are going to hear a reading from Joe this evening. While he's reading, we're going to have the text up on screen for you. I just want you to be aware that you're in control of your own screen. So if you want his face to be bigger and the text to be smaller, you can control that. Just have a click and play around and see if you can configure it to meet your needs. If you've got any tech problems, pop them in the chat for us, and I'll try my best to help you as we go through this event. Joe's reading, I'm delighted that we're also joined by Anthony and Exagaru. They're going to be chatting about the book and about Joe's poetry later on. And then towards the end of the hour, there'll be time as well for audience questions. So as well as finding the chat box, please find another button which says Q&A on it. And if you get your questions for Joe lined up in there, then Anthony can put them to him later on in the event. Now, thank you hugely for paying your £2 to be here. We really appreciate your support. You can buy yourself a discounted copy of the book from our website. I'm putting the link and the code in the chat for you, but that'll all happen later again as well, and it'll come as an email and stuff, so you don't need to worry about that now. I think really that's all the official stuff out of the way. So I'm really pleased to introduce Anthony and Exagaru, a poet and publisher who I hope you're aware of already. He runs Outspoken, the Poetry and Music Night, which runs at the South Bank Centre in London, and he also runs Outspoken Press. And his latest poetry collection came out with Granta just a couple of months ago. That's called Heritage Aesthetics. So check his work out if you don't know him already. But I'm pleased to invite him to join me on screen now, so we'll get going. Thanks.
Thank you, Jasmine. Hello, everyone. How are you? I hope you're all good. Delighted to be here to celebrate Joe's wonderful book, More Sky. I've got my copy here with my notes in. I guess I should really introduce Joe. I'm not going to read the official bio. I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we know each other. So I've known Joe for a few years. I think we first met through Bath magazine, and then we published his pamphlet, 54 Questions to the Man Who Sold a Shotgun to My Father, on Outspoken Press. And yeah, I've been a big fan of his writing and his, I guess, perseverance and determination and hunger for poetry and good poetry, artistry. Is very important. And yeah, when I got this through the post and I read it, I was really taken aback by, I guess, the range. The tone of address is something that I kind of want to talk to Joe about. And the overlap in our work, I'm pretty kind of interested in masculinities, the father figure as a kind of symbol for a lot of different things within society. And I think Joe covers a lot of that as well and addresses a lot of that too. Just to say, before we get going, some of the content in the book, some viewers might find slightly uncomfortable. The book deals with quite a lot of sensitive issues and subjects. So just to be aware, as a kind of trigger warning, that there might be themes within the book that some people might find unsettling. So just to be aware of that. Joe, could I introduce you, or invite you to join us here? How are you, man?
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, bro. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you for being here. Yeah, that was a nice intro. And hopefully I said, I feel good. Yeah, I feel like quite overwhelmed. I think the past couple of weeks have been weird. I don't know how you felt when you first published your first book, but it feels, I don't think you can like prepare yourself, even though no one's really going to read it.
People do read it. I think when you publish, I think it doesn't get, I mean, I've published 4 books now, 5 different genres, but yeah, like it doesn't it's just that you just know how to handle the kind of roller coaster, whereas the first time you don't really know where the bumps are in the road. And I think as you do more, I mean, it's still the same anti-climax at the end of it all, but you know what to expect a bit more. Yeah, congratulations. It's really quite a feat to have to capture so much. And I think, you know, there's things that we can talk about when we get going after you've done your reading, but I think there's so many really interesting motifs and details and kind of sentiments in the book that really resonated with me, and I'm sure they'll resonate with others as well. Before we get into the physics of More Sky, do you want to do a reading?
Yes, I think I'm going to read. That's what we're here for, to begin with.
I'm going to turn myself off and then I'll come back in about 20 minutes, so past.
Cool, nice. All right, guys. So yes, I'm going to do a quick reading from the book. Anthony talked about the pamphlet that Outspoken published a few years ago now. I decided to read tonight a kind of sequence from that, or the first few poems from that, which actually are the first few poems from this book. And I'm not sure if Lucy is going to share the poems or if they're already being shared. But yeah, so what can I say about these poems? There we go. So thanks, Lucy. So yeah, this first poem is the first poem in the book. Obviously you can see it's called And God Said. And this is one of the only poems that I don't really have. For most of my poems, I've developed these kind of anecdotes, right? Which you do a reading, and it hopefully you do this thing where you tell a funny story and then you read a sad poem and no one gets too bored or too upset. But anyway, this poem doesn't really have I don't have anything to say about it. I'm just going to read it. And God said, every time a horse lies down in a sunlit field, an island goes up off the coast of Alaska or Peru, or in the middle of a lake south of Stockholm. Every time a whale is born albino, a man doesn't die of liver failure. And every time it rains at sea, a child speaks first words. Every time you watch the football in your alcoholic father's flat, on his little settee that unfolds into a bed in case you ever wanted to stay. A forest disappears and a doorbell rings. Every time the ref blows the whistle and your father boils the kettle, and somewhere islands are going up and oil rigs just watching. So yeah, that poem, actually, I could have said a bit about that poem. So I wrote that a little while ago when I had finished. I wrote that actually when I wrote these first few poems. I'd finished my master's in Manchester at the University of Manchester at the Centre for New Writing, and I had moved home and I was working as a postie, which we'll get onto in a sec. And I spent a lot of time with my dad in his little flat, his little council flat, just watching. We would stream football, and that was like a way of hanging out with him outside of the pub. I always try and like meet him outside of the pub because it's good to set a boundary like that. So anyway, this poem is called Sambas for Christmas. Now, yeah, my father is an alcoholic, and he's also very poor. So which is a strange thing to say, but for anyone watching now with an alcoholic friend or relative or whatnot, you know that it's very hard to give, it's difficult to give someone who is an alcoholic money, because they will invariably go on a bender, have a seizure, and you know what happens. So my sister and I over the years have had to like find ways in which to give our dad money without giving him money. So that being said, if I go to my local, where my dad drinks, the Duke, it's called the Duke of Monmouth, but we're in Oxford, where I was born. And if I stand at the bar and I look to the screens, and then I look down below the screens where all the old boys sit, and these are like very important men for me in my childhood, kind of uncles of my life, really, and my dad's there, and they're all sitting there. And then if you go down to ground level, you see that all of these men are wearing the same shoes. And it's actually really funny. It's very moving because it makes them very vulnerable, I think. But these like scary men are like all wearing, they're all in this little kind of like shoe club almost. So yeah, every year it's kind of a tradition that my sister and I will buy our dad a pair of shoes because he can't afford them. So this poem is called Sambas for Christmas. In a corner of some far-flung town, on some moon of some planet, at the edge of some pocketed galaxy, the souls of my father's new trainers are landing on tarmac, squeaking as they take off again, box fresh at the end of his faded black jeans. They will squeak for a week or so, and then he will die on his back in his sleep, like Jimi Hendrix after a night at a pub that's not quite my local, whistling as he stumbles home, running his fingers through a rosemary bush, awash in the chippies neon blue. Believe for a minute that I am not a son who buys trainers for his father, but a molecule of gas inside a star whose light still touches a city that's not quite Oxford, where a father who's not quite mine tries on pairs of Adidas, Nike, struggling with the laces, the incomprehensible bow. So have a sip of water. So as I mentioned earlier that I used to be a postie. I was a postie for about a year and a bit. And it was actually like 100% the best job I've ever had. I basically like wrote a ton. I wrote a lot of this book while being a postie. And it was just great because there was like early starts. Anyway, being a postie is brilliant, but it's super weird. And I'm going to give you 3 reasons why it's weird. The first reason why it's weird is everyone loves you because you're bringing them something, and that's just like not my experience of life remotely. Like I feel like when I'm walking around Lewisham where I live, it feels like everyone hates me. But the second reason why it's weird is the outfit that you have to wear. You kind of have to wear a costume. You're some sort of red elf. Like I had a trolley as well because I couldn't drive at the time. So I had a trolley, and I was like the runt of the office because I was the least senior postie in the office. So I would do all the jobs that no one wanted to do. So I basically pushed trolley like 13 miles a day. So anyway, the costume is like something that's weird. The third reason that's weird, or the third thing that's weird about being a postie are the notes that people leave on their door when if you've gone to the shop or something and you want your parcel to be left somewhere. You have no idea how exuberant these notes can get. So yeah, I wrote this poem in the form of one of those notes, and it's called Dear Postie. Dear Postie, if no answer, please leave parcel inside. Sorry, started later on down the poem. Dear Postie, if no answer, please leave parcel behind rhododendron. If storm hits and goes away, please leave parcel inside wheelie bin with brick on top. If crying baby can be heard on approach, tap 3 times on bottom left panel of shed window. Do not ring doorbell. If rainbow windmill spins slower than usual, open phone and call alcoholic father. If rainbow windmill stops spinning at any moment, come back in month with picture of alcoholic father eating fish and chips in park. If phone rings out, wait for nesting swallows to return from Africa, then call again. Do not mention alcoholic father to friends, colleagues, woman you love. Do not kiss woman you love. Do not eat, sleep, shit, watch TV until alcoholic father is spotted leaving Tesco with Guinness and hula hoops. Do not, I repeat, do not drive to 24-hour Shell garage. Spend following afternoon outside alcoholic father's flat. Old ladies watching, bay windows, blue with countdown. Yes, so this poem, I've actually never read this poem, reading before. This poem I wrote just after, when did I write this poem? Yeah, I wrote this poem just after having moved to London, actually. And I remember being just kind of overwhelmed by the amount of the amount of buildings. That sounds really lame, but just like a lot of skyscrapers. And yeah, I've always had this like shame about getting drunk. When I'll get drunk. I think if you have alcoholism in your family, of which like one side of my family are very much all alcoholics, and you see the damage that it does. It's very hard to have like a normal relationship with alcohol as a person. I definitely don't have a normal one. But I think this poem and a lot of the poems I'm actually writing at the moment deal with like the shame around that and that kind of strange thing, which is unique to people who are, I think, children of alcoholics. Anyway, when he waits at the bar, my father's brain is miles above his pint. Like the swimming pool, I watch 6 cranes lower onto the roof of a skyscraper as my father gets drunk with a man called Gary, the kind of drunk you can peer into, their earrings glinting, their hearts a pair of tiny red whales. I watch the builders fit 3 whole floors with windows. One guy comes out carrying a fox, dangles it Michael Jackson style over the lip of a balcony. My father cannot remember the name of the film, the score of the game. Sometimes I drink and lie and tell strangers in pub gardens that my father is being built, that he's coming back from the ground, that I'll pull a fox out of his body one day, carry it in my arms, blinking and pissing to a sunlit table just like this one. Oh yes, so there's nothing to say about this poem. Withdrawal. Unpack tins of soup, open windows, scrape grease from the hob, sync your breathing with his, walk with purpose between the bathroom and the light-filled kitchen. Find a moth and let it live. Postcards in a drawer, pictures of a holiday. On the carpet, build a house out of tins, a family, trees dotted around a pond, a swallow's nest like the back door of a star, a note on the table you'll soon cycle away from, your fingers like prunes and smelling of bleach. Okay, so I wanted to read this poem because this is the oldest poem in the book, and I wrote this poem, God, like at the end of 2016, I think, which is just wild. And I wrote this poem in Manchester, so I had finished my undergraduate degree and I was working in a bar in Didsbury, and I was just going to the library like every day. And this poem was like a really important poem for me. Like it was one of those poems that you write when you're like, oh wow, like you become quite proud of it quite quick, just because at the time it was like I'd been trying to write about my dad a lot, and this was something that this was a poem where I felt I had like articulated something honest and true, and I guess that like turned into really, like, we'll talk about this later, but like my whole reason for writing, I think. So this poem, I spent a lot of time as a really small child at the edge of a betting shop, so Ladbrokes actually. So my dad, as well as being an alcoholic, is addicted to gambling, and horse racing and gambling in particular. So on the way back from nursery, he'd pick me up from nursery, and then we'd go past Ladbrokes, and he'd put me outside on like the step at the top of the stairs, and then he'd bring out betting slips for me to draw pictures on for him. Somewhere far, walking back from nursery, down Corn Market to the shop on Ship Street. You wait out here now. And then a pen, one of those little blue ones. Draw me something nice, betting slips, 20 of them. And when I'd finished the first batch, out you came with more. Very nice, and I like that one. Maybe a refresher or two. Men passing on the step smiled or nodded or shuffled, but mostly they said nothing, because I was as much a part of that place as any of the footballers on the walls, or the fruit machines, or the commentators, or the screens where you would stand when you thought I couldn't see. Don't come in. You mustn't come in. Tapping your foot, hands in pockets, face turned up at the horses, making their way from left to right across the green light of somewhere far from here. Cool, I think we only have like a couple more. Let me check the time. It's funny, you know, read poems that are that old. It's like, I feel like I will never write a poem like that again. But yeah, so this next poem, yeah, I wanted to read this. This is the title poem, obviously, and I thought it'd be fitting to read tonight. Yeah, I remember having a really like visceral experience walking down the street in Oxford, and they'd knocked down this massive building, and it was like, I got really sad, and it was just very telling. Like, what makes me sad is like, I guess, absence and things not being there anymore. I'm terribly nostalgic, kind of even about like yesterday. I also think I've kind of nicked the last line from a Jack Underwood poem from Jack's first book, Happiness, where he says, he's talking about his kid, and his kid isn't born yet. He's saying, I'm a mess with your scarf. Anyway, so there should be more sky after Jack Underwood. Have you ever had that thing when a building gets demolished? A building you walk past every day, a big but inconspicuous building. A building you've never properly looked at, couldn't draw from memory, guess its number of windows, the impression of a building. The color of sandstone in your periphery as you hurry into afternoons, interviews, wedding receptions, and all of a sudden it's gone. There's sky where that building used to be, and you're a mess with your child's bike helmet. Oh, The Secret, okay. So, I'd kind of forgotten which poems I said we're going to read, so thank you, Lucy, for reminding me. So yeah, this poem, again, there's not really much to say about this poem. Yeah, I guess one thing to say is like, this poem talks about lithium, which is medication for bipolar. The Secret. You only smoked at midnight, the back door ajar, moon in the beveled glass, a tap, footsteps, the latch. Some nights I could hear meteors from my bed, and still the television, CNN, the muffled fucks or a cough, every boom and crackle of every crater opening up in the carpet. Yes, it rained one morning when I asked, Dad, what's lithium? And you bolted then rebolted the kitchen window. I might have believed lithium was a small bird or a smell that glass couldn't keep out or in. Oh, it looks like I might have frozen when I was reading one of the poems. Anyway, don't worry about that. Zoom, eh? Zoom is so fun. So this next poem is called, yes, My Father is Sitting on the Other Side of the French Doors. I spent a while living in Alaska a few years ago, and this poem, I think, is kind of set there and with that place in mind. My father is sitting on the other side of the French doors. It was Mordecai. Okay, yeah. Sorry, Tom. Thanks, Tom, for saying that. My father is sitting on the other side of the French doors, just sitting like a grizzly bear I shoo away in June, back hunched, staring at the ground, a red biro tucked behind his ear. I like to think he's marveling at the patio we dug, the pebble path I skipped school to help lay, or planning for another pond, another row of sunflowers by the wall. Right on cue, the cat arrives and figurates a plant pot as my father itches the back of her neck with the biro, flicks green flies from his shirt. I can never wake early from this dream, never sprint fast enough down the landing, never unzip the blinds, swing open the window in time to hear the thud of his footsteps over the shed roof, branches bouncing back to stillness. And I'll never know, how could I, that in this dream he'd grow old, grow fur eventually. The locals think I'm crazy. They say you shouldn't feed the bears. Dumb Brit. They say a grizzly will return for a lifetime to the spot it once found food, the exact kink of river, stubby bush, overflowing garbage can, but I do it anyway. Always at night, barefoot, in case he comes. My father sniffs me out, calls off this silly game, crosses the Atlantic, Canada, and I'm already gone. He'll see my shoes tucked behind the glass, laces in a bow, and he'll think no different. He'll wait, he'll sit, back hunched, staring at the ground, till August ends and the bears, wide-eyed, come for him too. So I think this is actually the last poem. It's so interesting reading some of these poems. I will, yeah, that last poem, I don't think I'll ever write a poem like that ever again. Just kind of it feels like a proper poem. I don't know if I write proper poems anymore, but anyway. I think this is the last one. This is called Lamech. So this is interesting, actually. I don't really know anything about the Bible. And Lamech is a biblical name. Lamech is the father of Noah. Lamech is also, there's basically two Lamechs in like the heritage of Adam and Eve, right? They're like distant cousins. And I had read about one of these Lamechs basically being an alcoholic, written in the Old Testament and getting kicked out of pubs. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. And then I had read like, oh, Noah's dad is called Lamech. And I was like, I assume they're the same one. And I thought, that's really like, that's so profound that Noah then did this and had what happened to Noah. But then it turned out it was the wrong one. So this is named Lamech after the wrong Lamech, but who cares, eh? Lamech. I ask my father to die under my breath in the back of a cab on a Saturday afternoon. Traffic at a standstill both ways. The pair of us heading for a cinema like normal people. I ask the driver to take us back to the pub. I shake my head, begin to name things, tree, car, cloud, street lamp, pull my father down onto my lap, stroke his bald head. Look, I say, a park, children are playing. Listen, I say, it has started to rain. I think that's it, you know? I think that was the last poem. There we go.
Amazing, man. How you feeling? Was it?
Yeah, it feels good. Yeah, it was good. It was all right. I hope it sounded all right.
Yeah, it was brilliant. It was fantastic. Yeah, lots of I've got lots of notes. I don't think I'll be able to get through all of them, but we can have a go at talking about, I guess, some of the themes and the kind of more technical aspects of what you're doing in the poems and with the book. And I think what's interesting is that because they span such a kind of timeline in regards to like your own development as a writer, it might be interesting. I know you kind of touched on it as well, but I'm always interested in how you kind of network poems that were written years and years apart, when you're essentially like a different person and your relationship to the craft was probably more kind of prosaic or pedestrian. And as you kind of become more urbane, how does that impact your, I guess, how does that impact the world of the book?
It's super weird. It was really bizarre, and also something that I was really aware of when I had the big batch that I had. I think like it's hard to even like talk about or think about the space, because the poems, I think, are almost like snapshots of my interiority at a certain time. So it's like really hard to even access them now. But I think, well, I hope it makes for like kind of probably a weird reading experience, because there's a big range, I would guess, across the poems. And I definitely think so that the Skydock, the kind of the long work at the end, that was that obviously I think quite clearly the last thing I wrote and the most recent thing, and the thing probably which like most reflects my poetics now, but even that's like 2 years old at this point. So it's hard for me to say what it does to the book, because I'm not even sure what the book is anymore at this point. But I guess for the poems themselves, like what that poem I wrote about Somewhere Far, the one about being in the bookies, that feels to me like a really traditional poem. And it's kind of like an anecdote of a poem, which is different. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was going to kind of talk about like there's three like central tensions that I think the book, that the whole collection kind of pivots around, and one of them is you work across the landscape of memory. So all the poems kind of look back, and they're usually a child, you know, they're looking at a boy, at the small boy, and that small boy is kind of in contrast to his old father. The second one is kind of the idea of the confession, the disclosure, because if you hold the line through an anecdote, there's obviously a retelling of some kind. And then the third component, I guess, would be tragedy. And I'm interested in, because, you know, they're sad, like there's something quite lachrymose about these poems. They're not, but I'm also interested in how they hold the rope of love, because that feels to me, that's what kind of, you know, when you read them, there is something so profound. When you bypass those three things that I've just outlined, there is a love there, and a desire to sustain that love, to hold that love, to complicate that love, and to, I think, grow it. So I'm interested in your relationship to confession, tragedy, and memory in relationship, or in relation to love.
I think it really stems from like, I've been thinking about this recently. I was chatting to my mum about it, actually. It stems, I think, from like a desire to, well, one, like having relate to my father in a way in which he's absent emotionally in much of my life. So like the poems are, I guess, like an attempt at like creating some kind of proximity, and like experiencing love that way. But I think in terms of like the confessional and the tragedy, I think that would come from trying to like witness things, and like it sounds lame to say excavate things or exercise things, but I think to like bear witness is something I'm like super interested in, and it's like something that it gives me energy in writing. Like I can't write a poem unless I'm not like telling someone about something or revealing something, but bearing witness to something that's like maybe I haven't been able to bear witness to before. That makes sense.
Is there something, I hate the word cathartic in poetry. It's such a bullshit term. But there's something else. There's a kind of, not a release. There's something else that happens when you impart. And the thing is that it's not information. Like, these aren't simple retellings of a story. In other words, woe me, listen to what I've been through in my life. There's something more profound happening here. And I guess what I'm interested to know is, like, what happens to your body as when you feel you're able to, I guess, not metabolize your past, but put it in a container, in a unit, and that unit is the poem. What happens to the body when you feel that, again, not excavate, although you use the word, you excavate, but something happens in that. And I still haven't quite worked out what the bodily sensation is. The closest word I can get to it is kind of satisfaction or relief, maybe. Definitely not catharsis. But so I'm interested in, like, how do you find that within the body? How do you hold these stories and these sensations in the body?
Yeah, I think probably some adrenaline. I think when I get close to what I'm trying to say, or when it builds over like the period of a morning or something, when it's like clear that a poem is about to happen, and I've been thinking about something that might have happened when I was a kid, or something I've been worrying about, it would be kind of adrenaline until it comes out. And I often don't really redraft my poems, so they are quite hard to access for me. This is what I mean about them being like almost like a reflection of an internal or an interiority. I can't access them afterwards. So they're very much like, oftentimes my poems will be as they were written in they take an hour to write or 2 hours, and then that's it. So it's like that kind of, I get an adrenaline from it, I think. And it is really in the body. It's incredibly in the body.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I don't find adrenaline. I feel aliveness. Like, I feel that all my senses feel like very acute, and there's a kind of aliveness within everything. And it's the idea of, paying attention and focusing on the specifics and the details that make their way into post. I guess I'm the opposite, because I take months and months and months, and my things go through about 58 different versions before I keep tinkering. So I guess the opposite would be like, that initial burst is, like almost religious, that whole bang. But I'm the opposite. I kind of start really slow and then work my way up and get going. Yeah. So it's interesting to hear these processes. We've got 2 questions here. One, Jer says, how significant is the Irish aspect to your identity in terms of your writing?
I think to me, it's really significant, even though I sound completely un-Irish, obviously. But I mean, we carry a lot of shame, and my Irish family carry a lot of shame, and it's they had a very painful experience being Irish, having moved here in the 60s. Thank you, Jim. I know I do have a ginger beard. So yeah, it's I feel like I'm writing to get close to my Irish family. A lot of them are dead, and a lot of them don't talk, and we don't talk anymore. It's a really painful history, and I think that is like, I'm at least imparting or exploring some of that in my writing. And yeah, as anyone who's like born out of the diaspora, it's like strange, like odd thing. You don't want to be gratuitous or take advantage, but the Irish is particularly interesting and like strange, has a relationship with shame, which I think is like particular to being Irish. But yeah, it's a strange one.
And do you think that shame is a kind of hangover from British colonialism? The shame that is inherent. I mean, where would that shame come from? Where the notion of having to be ashamed or feeling shame? Where does that stem, do you think?
Yeah, it has to stem from all kinds of the colonialist history, and then the history which I guess you just inherit. You must inherit bodily stuff, but then also having moved here, my family moved here en masse really in the 50s and 60s, and my nana and granddad were both, I think they were one of like 15 each, so they all moved over with their sisters and brothers. So my dad and his brothers had, you know, like a lot of family, and they grew up and they were in a very much like a tight-knit community in Coventry where they settled. And I think it was just horrific for them, like a lot of the time. And then also, but my dad having an Irish accent in Coventry, but then he wasn't really Irish because he'd go back to Dublin, and then so it was a strange thing, as anyone's experience of diaspora is really. But I think there's a strange, I'm still thinking about it. I read an article in The Guardian today by Carmel, or what's her name? I can't remember her name, but about inheriting alcoholism through her Irish family, through like various, her relationship with shame picked up there. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling now, but yeah, I think it's really important for me and my family.
Yeah, I think heritage is always, you know, it's always, particularly diasporic heritages are always difficult to, you can't really pin them down. They're so complex and overlapping, and yeah, kind of this cavernous as well. Like, you know, like when you try to really think about where things begin and where things end, you can't. You just see yourself in the moment of that kind of arc.
It's also like you feel ashamed to, you feel like ashamed to even call yourself. I feel like quite ashamed to even call myself Irish in a way, because I haven't grown up with an Irish accent, or don't have any of the negative, like I don't grow up where there's much xenophobia towards Irish people here. I don't sound Irish. I don't necessarily look Irish. So yeah, it's a strange one.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I guess, I mean, we could talk about what the idea of looking like you're from a place, because I'm quite fascinated about, I mean, I'm Cypriot, so like we look like we could be from anywhere. And time, you know, like looking like you're supposed to come, that archetype, where does that get inherited from? Who creates that template of the archetypal look or physiognomy or whatever it might be? Anyway, there's another question here from Robert, who says, you said you didn't think you'd write quote unquote proper poems again. What do you mean by proper poems?
So I always say, I have a good friend, Boyega Odebanjo, we always talk about poems. And I think I would say when I started writing this book, I was really interested in Ted Hughes. No, when I was studying, I like loved Ted Hughes. He was like my go-to guy, as I think a lot of people might have done when they like first discover poetry or whatever. And then I would say Ted would be like the poemiest poet. And then now I write super differently. The poems I'm writing at the moment don't have any punctuation. They're all over the place. And so yeah, I think a poem would be like an anecdotal poem with like 15 lines, and they'd all have nice little stanzas, and it will be a lyric eye, and it might be a bit confessional.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Like I think the traditional poem, and when you talk about poems that reflect the canon, like the British canon anyway, you start thinking of a poem, but I think we're kind of at this weird juncture where stylistically, like the lyric poets who are spoken word adjacent have kind of moved into this new space that is now being carved out. So we're probably too close to it to be able to kind of look back at it, or kind of abstract ourselves from it to talk about it in objective terms. But I feel we're in this kind of liminal space at the moment where it's moving from one mode or one aesthetic into another one. That's probably been catalyzed by the American MFA programs as well, particularly the lyric. So cool, yeah, there's that one. And then Laura says, what other poets have influenced you the most? Or which other poets have influenced you the most?
Wow. Probably with this book particularly, it would have been a lot of Irish poets. So I mean, John McAuliffe, who is on this call as well, on this event as well, who is the editor at Carcanet, was also my tutor at university for my undergrad and my master's. And John, I think for a long time I was just trying to rewrite John's poems, if I'm honest. So yeah, John McAuliffe, Verna Grock, who was another one of my tutors, and then Colette Bryce, I think, was a big influence on this book. I think then probably Wayne Holloway Smith, definitely, as he is an influence on a bunch of kind of people nowadays. And who else? I think probably some American poets like Anne Carson. I was really loving. Although I think this book isn't really an Anne Carson book. But I think the stuff I'm writing at the moment is maybe more in the way of like Anne Carson, Emily Berry, maybe Shane McRae type of thing. I think this book actually, I don't want to say the Dickman brothers. Who's the one who kind of writes the narrative-y ones? Is that Matthew or Michael?
So Matthew writes quite long, chatty, conversational, and Michael writes very kind of short, sparse. Like he's the guy who gets in trouble, whereas Matthew's the guy who doesn't.
Yeah, Matthew was the one who. Matthew, I remember reading his poem, his section.
Tchaikovsky's Revolver is.
Yeah, and those poems like had a big impact on this book. Absolutely, definitely.
It's interesting because they've all got, particularly like Matthew Dickman, Wayne, Shane. No, maybe not so much Shane, but definitely Wayne and Dick and Matthew. They've got like a very conversational tone of address, and it's like it's kind of like a stylized. I mean, I was actually going to ask you about that, like your approach to creating voice, because there's a kind of deadpanness, but there's also something quite hipstery as well within the poems. And I'm not sure if it's the way that you socialize the poems. So basically like where they're set and the things around them that denote kind of working class life, alcoholism, shoes, crisps, pints, pubs, all that kind of business. And how you create a particular, because Wayne's got quite a similar tone of address as well, where there's a lot of repetition and inversion. I am eating my lipstick, I am my lips, I am my eating, you know. And it's that I amness rather than I'm that I get not having the contraction, what that does to the tone. Does it make it feel definitive? Does it stabilize the tone, you know, a contraction versus the formal I am? Because I think you've got a lot of that as well, like definitive, these kind of statements.
Yeah, I remember that the Matthew Dickman poem, my brother, all through that brother book, it's like my brother is, and then we'll be doing whatnot. And that was huge for me, finding out that you could do that, because it makes something so immediate and it just lands you there straight away. So what does it do for the poems though? Yeah, I think it must just make like possibility happen straight away. And you don't have to faff.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think about some. Yeah, I think it'd be something in terms of the spaces they occupy. I think that would just be like where I grew up, basically. So I was always in these kind of socialized or social spaces, and then always in them for like long periods of time. So like anyone who, like a child, we just would be in the pub like all of Saturday, all of Sunday, while my dad was there with his mates. So like in these kind of social spaces, working class spaces for like 7-8 hours at a time, you get like imbued with the space almost.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, I think you definitely feel that claustrophobia. I think I think a lot of the poems feel claustrophobic. There's so much material. There's so many like nouns, concrete nouns that kind of populate these poems. You definitely feel kind of claustrophobic inside them, which I guess is purposeful or maybe a subconscious act on your behalf. But you definitely feel that interiority reflects pub life or a bar or somewhere that, I mean, for me, I've got a bag of sensory issues, so I can't do kind of closed spaces and noise and all that kind of business. I start freaking out. But I think you definitely feel that intensity. And because you've got no punctuation in a lot of them as well, there's very little room to breathe inside the poems too, which kind of again create this real suffocating. I think it's, you know, it's done really, really well. Tom's got a question here. He says, I'm interested in these symbols which repeat: shotgun, father, field, pub. You mentioned your father is alive, but there is an overwhelming sense of grief in the book. What are you grieving?
That's a good question. Yeah, and quite close to the bone. So yeah, I don't want to say too much, but I think I don't know how much to say really. There's basically, I think my dad has yeah, I don't know if I can say all this. Basically, I'm grieving. It's a strange thing to like grieve someone who's alive. But my dad has been like dying for a long time in many ways, and to like watch him change in these ways. I'm not going to say specifically how and why and all that, but that's what I'm grieving. And I think I'm like, it's a strange thing because I say to my friends as well, like Boyega, and we talk, like I don't know much about death, to be honest. Like not many people have died while I've been alive that I know. But there's like a real, almost like a death drive within part of my family, and like my Irish family specifically. Things have happened and things happen. And watching someone like waste away on alcohol is like watching them die, and that's my experience of it. So I think that's what I'm grieving, without saying too much and being too honest.
Yeah, I think you definitely get that sense where you're not necessarily grieving a death per se, but it's the presence of a person, you know, like it's the idea of, I remember that, I think it was when I was a kid, I think it was a Tupac lyric where he said people get high off a slow form of suicide. And it was that, I mean, I was like 12 or 13 listening to that, but then it really made me think about, you know, forms of a slow death. Like any kind of addiction is essentially a slow form, because you know that that's what it's doing. And I think that, yeah, that sense of grief that Tom's kind of picked out from these books really kind of, encapsulates that kind of thing. What is, I mean, we've got a few minutes left, but I just, before we go, what is your relationship to the kind of, how did you go about, maybe that's a better question, how did you go about networking the family? Because again, it's something that I kind of, you know, I obsess over, the idea of a family. And in this book, your sister features, your dad features, uncles, you know, like there's a whole world here. And how close are they to the physical? Are they kind of composites, or are they, you know, are they the real people, or are they symbol?
Yeah, it's a weird one. I think they're all real to an extent, but it is art, you know. But they are essentially the real people. And it's a strange thing. It's a really strange thing with this book, in that like I'm coming to terms with the fact that I have, you know, when like you hear about someone, you know, the word doxed, when you like tell everyone your address online. I feel like I'm talking about my family. And it's like a weird thing to have come to terms with, like putting so much out there and and having really any disregard, a lot of like, I haven't really shown much regard to like the protection of the self, or like the protection of the people who are still here, the people who are in the book, who I'm essentially doxing, as it were. But yeah, it's like a hard thing to answer and to think about. Like my dad was in the pub the other day, and I took him the book to give him, and all his mates were there, and it was like, I found it so difficult. I gave him the book, and he's like really proud of it, but I gave him the proof before, and he read it, and he gets it, you know, he understands it. And it's like, that's great for me, but it's like, it's really hard, and it's really intense, and it's like, these people are real people with like real lives, and they go about, and like this book is now out there, and like everyone fucking knows like what happened and like what is happening, which is so strange.
It's strange, but it's also not. I think what I love about this kind of like quote unquote confession is that these subjects and themes are not exclusive to you. Like there are thousands, millions of people who are in exactly the same. I think what artists end up doing is obviously articulating this kind of malaise, but also finding a channel for other people to explore that discomfort in, creating that channel. So I kind of see it as it's a shared thing. And what is also interesting is that somebody said to me, what are the ethics of implicating family? Somebody asked me this once, and I thought, you know, like when you write about your dad, you're writing about yourself. You know, you're not writing about your dad. These are your experiences in relation to your dad. And I kind of feel that, you know, we're part of that dialogue as children, as witnesses, as you said earlier, and the poetry of witness is about kind of exploring the event, exploring the thing that happened, and problematizing it. And that really is, I think, the job of poetry. Like, it's not a memoir, it's not kind of, you know, a tragedy safari or whatever it might be. We're looking at, I mean, Claudia Rankine said once that the job of poetry is also the job of sociology. And I'm kind of interested in the overlap and how we take these social issues and make poetry out of them as a way for other people to be able to explore, not necessarily understand, but just to be able to kind of inhabit and explore what that thing looks like.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really helpful way to look at it, because I've been getting very bogged down, to be honest, in like the specifics of experience of this book, and like worrying about that. Whereas there are a bunch of people in the world who have experienced probably the same thing or similar things. And this is just like, yeah, it's just, writing this book was not like a sad experience. And it wasn't like a tragic experience. It wasn't a cathartic experience either. It was actually quite like a fun experience. So I think like it was an exploration, and it is an exploration of like my interiority and my family's interiority.
Yeah.
And like I'm getting used to it being out. Yeah. But that's a helpful way of looking at it, like the fact that it's like a sociology almost.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. I'm gonna well, thanks very much for that, Joe. Thanks for again, like, you know, sharing all that. And I don't think we ever overshare. I think we just, you know, give stuff to be taken on and for people to take on into their lived lives. So yeah, thanks very much for that. Jasmine, do you want to jump back in? Sorry, we didn't get, there's some more questions, but we run out of time, so yeah, I'll have to leave it there.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Thank you guys for your questions. Sorry that we ran out of time. It went so quickly. Thank you both so much. It was such a great discussion. Congratulations, Joe. Yeah, I could have kept you going for ages and talking more. I felt super privileged to be in the room, like hearing you guys discuss this stuff. So yeah, big thanks and big congratulations. Thank you guys for being here as well. It was great to see your messages coming in the chat, and your questions were great. So I'm going to put in the chat for you now the link. You can go and buy yourself a discounted copy of the book. You can buy one for all of your own family, which you should definitely do. If you have any problems with any of that, like, give us an email and we'll be able to help you. So the last thing for me to say is please join us next time. Our next launch is the 22nd of February. We're launching another debut collection from Charlotte Eichler. Both poets, I should say, were debuted in our new poetry's anthologies. So please attend that as well if you liked Joe's book. I'm going to put that in the chat for now. And sign up to our newsletter, please, so you can see what's going on and keep in touch with us. Okay, so I'll leave the chat open for you for a couple of minutes. You can get your last minute messages in, but really that's all from us. Well done, you guys. Thank you again, and congratulations. Hey.